well-being, and travelers. Please welcome Nuno and his panel.
Thank you. So first of all, thank you for all of those who stuck it out after lunch. I know this can be the difficult portion of the day, but I appreciate it. And I think we want to get started, and I actually want to get started with a question that's more art than science for this morning session. But are we really living in a world where the value of creative has been downplayed, and are we overvaluing the value, the impact of targeting and programmatic approaches?
Hi. That's a question, right, that we've been kind of mulling over all day today. And for me, I think that a lot of people wish that technology could do what the human brain can do. A lot of advertisers want an easier answer, and obviously we're allowing a lot of these technical platforms to do things like tell us who to target and when. But as somebody mentioned in an earlier panel, it can't really get into the head of the consumers to tell us why they don't do something, why they don't buy something. So I think that if we start to devalue the creative process and the message, we get what we saw in the presentation just before. We get ads that don't work as well because they're not resonating with the target audience. The technology, whether it's buying media programmatically or whether it's the technology of delivery of the content, I don't care if it's on your mobile device, on your wrist, or implanted in your head. If that message isn't the right message for that person, it's not going to work, and they're not going to get the ROI.
And forgive me if you can just introduce yourselves.
Oh, yes.
Bypass that question entirely.
I'm Omi. I'm with Diaz Cooper Advertising. We're a boutique agency here in Miami, and our focus is on very niche. It's on helping advertisers get the most out of their e-marketing, automation, and video purchases. We're very big on closing the loop of the technology and the execution.
My name is Rich. I'm in charge of programmatic media at a company called Conversant. Conversant is a industry company in the technology space that focuses on really personalization and personalized messages to the consumer. And most recently, we've been acquired by Epsilon, part of Alliance Data Systems.
Hello, I'm just really glad to be here because it's 70 degrees warmer here than when I left my house up in the Northeast this morning. I'm Paul Ruskowski, Varick Media Management. We are, I guess, a trading desk, one of the older terms that best describes it, what we do. We focus solely on the programmatic media space across all channels and display, mobile, video, and social, digital out of home, and beginning to work in TV as well. And we use a lot of data in what we do. We've built our own DMP, or data management platform, that provides a lot of the decision-making logic of how we target users. And just on that quick question, we think creative's more important than ever because you can inform that creative now pretty much in real time with more details and more data around specifics of the messaging.
I'm Darren Trousdale. I'm the CEO of One Up Sports. Kind of wearing both hats today. I used to be on the agency side. Now I'm on the publisher side. One Up Sports is, we have an advertising business and a publisher network that is one of the largest mobile sports networks in the world.
Great, thanks for rating the ship on that. And Rich, basically the same question I asked you earlier. You've been on the kind of technology side from the last decade and a half. Where do you see kind of where the shift has happened and the value of the creative versus the technology?
Yeah, so to me, it really is about art and science together. So just what Paul even said. I mean, to me, the conversation is between the artistic side in terms of being able to understand the data. And then you can use that data. So whether you're making the ad or whether it's a personalized ad, whether or not it's a manual process that goes through a creative process, or it is a dynamic creative. I think the creative is more important today than ever because we actually understand who the consumer is. We understand where the ad is being delivered. And then the data points that we get back, or if you want to call it a feedback loop that's actually occurring, we get more feedback than we ever thought imaginable, and it's just only going to increase. And I think that when I talk to creatives, if anything, what they're trying to do is try to understand, how do I get better access to that data? Like a lot of times I think too, the media firms are shy to share data with the creative agencies, and sometimes because they're not the same firm. But there's a desire there, right? So what does that data mean to creative? How do I apply it, and how do I create better creative? And then you can get into, you know, automations of creative. So having different types of creative set up so that you can personally deliver a message to the consumer at the right time in the right place. I think creative is a very powerful piece to what we do today.
And I guess speak a little bit more to there's dynamic creative that you can do, right? You can change assets of a creative in real time to target a specific person, but where does the granularity of the targeting that you have kind of limit to how you can specifically speak to a person? Yeah, I mean, like, so you can have 100 attributes on someone, but you may choose to target more specifically the top high-level attributes, gender, age, and income in the creative. But if you have 100 or 1,000 data points on a user, you're not necessarily going to integrate everything about that user.
Yeah, I mean, then you'd run into massive scalability issues, right? So, and you could even, if it's a performance-based advertiser, you could even argue that, you know, you're going to lose a lot of performance. You also lose, if you get too granular with a message, at least the data that we see shows that, one, you lose scale. If you lose scale, you lose your ability to optimize that creative and really pick up new information. That said, if you look at retargeting, that's a very specific message to a very specific user based on something or an action they may have taken. And you can also then not just, I think, apply that data to the creative that's being delivered to the user, but you can now ship that, at least this is something we're doing, we ship that information back to print houses, we ship that data back to call centers, we ship that data back to the catalog company so that they can then update the creative in their offline messaging to that consumer as well. So I think that feedback loop goes both ways. But yeah, you don't want to be too granular or you limit yourself.
So you're saying that it's not just about the media targeting, it's about CRM as well?
100%.
So who do you think, just in general, who do you think is driving the conversation towards programmatic? Is it the agency? Is it the technology vendors? Or, you know, is it the brands even? Who's driving that conversation in your perspective?
It's, you know, we're in the early innings of this, and it's all over the place. There's no one way that that's happening today. There are situations where a technology vendor is going to drive that because they have something new they want to test out, and brands want to test some stuff and be leading edge. There are brands who are very engaged in this as well that are maybe more savvy, more advanced, maybe bigger investments in it. They're driving the conversations. And of course, there's the agencies. You know, often the agencies have taken a key spot in the relationship with an advertiser, and often because of that relationship that they've had historically, it puts them in a position to drive a lot of the decision making as well. They often are also leaning back on the technology companies, you know, maybe without the brand being too involved in that conversation. But so far, what we've seen is there's many people involved in these conversations.
And Darren, from, I guess, the publisher perspective, how have you been involved in those conversations? And, you know, you come from the agency side in the past, and you've been on one end of that conversation. How has that conversation changed for you?
So the conversation's a daily phone call from, you know, some company or another in the ad tech space about buying our inventory. You know, we can buy our inventory, and then it becomes more of a price discussion. You know, my view currently is there's a need for supply because the first you know, thing that was accomplished from the agency perspective at least was, wow, this is an efficient way to buy, which was in digital a non-efficient, you know, methodology before this really started hitting its stride. I think today what I'd like to see is the focus on quality improve, and that's that is part creative in discussion because this format, you know, if you take, you know, the way programmatic is working across the publisher side, there isn't as much about placement or use of this data as you're mentioning that could be put in place to improve the campaigns, but at some point you still are efficiently buying real estate, that how much data can really inform what's going to happen there. So we're looking at it going, the best executions are those who can merge, you know, two strategies into one and look at a go forward plan that leverages both. And for us, we like that because you can work with everybody. You can optimize your programmatic channels, but you still stay strong in the direct creative and creating those opportunities and making them more special and meaningful.
So, in your opinion, I mean, it would be just as important to have that engagement perspective as the ability to specifically target a user.
I just look at it and I'm like, it's great that you can efficiently buy my media, but how long are you going to stay in our media, and is the data you're getting back really going to tell you the full story of the buy you did through the programmatic channels with our company? I've seen it in other publishers too. I think that there's still work to be done, obviously. I like the idea of it is in the first innings. It is absolutely in the first innings. Because the loop back to media effectiveness needs to be there beyond what the campaign report is out of the system. I think it's a more holistic view that needs to be taken.
So Paul, with Varick Media, you called yourself in essence a trading desk. Where do you feel like the practice needs to lie? Is it with the agency in terms of programmatic? Is it with the agency? Is it with a technology provider, or is it maybe potentially a third category that you're servicing right now?
Sure. I think it's evolving into a new category, a new hybrid of the world we've come from, where you've got specific publishers or sellers of reaching audience, and then buyers at the agency level. Because we have technology involved with it now, it's a whole kind of new set of thinking, in some cases new set of people that have to be involved with this as well. And it's not very easy for some of the larger agencies to change on a dime in terms of getting those people aboard. So they need to lead into technology vendors and partners to help support them as they go through this transition. Today we see a lot more of the vendors, whether it's purely services or technology, working directly with a lot of the marketers and brands as well. I think that's going to continue. The agencies we're seeing are still there. I mean, the agencies are not out of it, but we're seeing them play also more strategic and a smarter role, where they don't need to put a large media planning team on buying very simple, low-touch execution banners and buttons and stuff. They can use their teams to think smarter, more strategically, whether it's about integrations or just multi-channel executions and otherwise as well. So, I do believe that you'll see the trading desk is a new species that came about within the last 5 or 6 years, right? So I think we're going to, and that will evolve into something better for the client as well over time, and we're going to see that continue to evolve.
Rich, when we spoke previously, you mentioned a little bit about the kind of marketing stack, and so where do you see the programmatic piece falling into that marketing stack?
I think it is the marketing stack. I mean, it's a key part to it. So if you think about all of the pieces working together like a car, right, or it's the engine in the car, it's at the end of the day. And if you don't mind, I just wanted to add on to what Paul said too. So I agree with you 100%. It is. I think everybody should. I think sometimes there's a fear that hey, these programmatic businesses are trying to put the agency out of business, and I don't believe that to be true at all. As a matter of fact, I think what you saw is, and so this ties back to the marketing stack question, is this desire to understand data more. I mean, right, so the interactive advertising space came about because it was you could measure it. Well, there were websites and there were other reasons, but really it's grown because it's measurable. You can understand it. There's a lot of data that you can now make actionable. And so as data became more and more actionable, it required systems that could act on that in real time, which required algorithms. And then as these systems started to come about, it required experts. And those experts just either one tended to be the media buying execution arm themselves, who just started to work with customers directly while agencies were getting up to speed. Folks like Varick, who would then come into the space and say, hey, we're experts. We can either one work with an agency or we can work with a client directly and be those experts. So I sort of almost call them back in the, like systems integrators almost, right? Experts really know how to activate that client's information. And then in terms of the marketing stack, the trend that I see happening there is that as we've moved in to the space is marketers wanting to own technology, right? So and that doesn't necessarily mean they want to operate it, and they still might need an agency to provide their media strategy and do their creative. They are wanting to own the technology so they can own their data. The agency has a choice to be the operator of that, or you could hire a specialized services company like Paul's company to be the operator of that and work with folks. And I think the stack is this incorporation of all these pieces, right? It's the creative execution, it's the data, where do you store that and how do you keep that? How do I execute and transact on the media? All of that become, how do you match your consumers in a CRM fashion? And everybody thinks about that stack differently, and I think marketers are really trying to understand that. You're starting to see a rise in consultancies to help marketers figure that out and understand that. Anyway, that's the trend that I see happening. If that's
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So, Omi, I think from an agency perspective, and you've kind of seen this transition happen in real time. Where have you seen particular success with the data-driven campaigns?
Yeah, for us in particular, we were doing email marketing for a long time, and when our advertisers started getting savvier about collecting data in a CRM type fashion on their consumers, whether it's past guests for a hotel or a cruise line, something like that, when we were able to get a hold, as an agency, get a hold of that data and understand how we could segment the data based on the buying behavior of each individual, we were able to then match the messaging to the right target. And we saw, for example, with email open rates double. And then when you add another layer of components such as video, we've seen an increase of upwards of 300%. So again, it's that balance of understanding. I think the agencies do need to understand that they have to get a hold of that data, and they have to have someone in-house to be able to interpret it and glean what is an insight from what is just a bunch of just overload of data. Because you're right, we can't touch every single point in an execution, multivariate testing, be damned, you can't multivariate for every variate, right? So, so the opportunity is in really segmenting to what makes sense for that advertiser, and then connecting the brand story to the right channels.
So, I'm just thinking about the marketing stack for a minute, which, on one hand, I think is just a great opportunity from a client perspective, if you think about a brand having that technology at their fingertips. But the problem is, I think the strategy is still rooted in efficiency from a cost perspective too. And looking at the numbers coming out of programmatic today on whole, and I just think about doing a general average in my head of what I see, the dollars just don't support it or the prices that we're seeing, and especially if I'm going to hand over that data. That data is extremely valuable as first-party customer data, and seeing a programmatic offering showing up with topping out at low single-digit CPMs is just not going to work.
Don't you think viewability is going to help that though? So as our ecosystem gets more focused on viewability, if we assume the stats we hear, half the impressions are viewable, supply and demand is going to double those prices, right? I mean, if somebody's only willing to pay on viewability, and you get better on driving viewable impressions, basically, either way you design your site or the way you lay your content out, those prices have nowhere to go but up.
Yeah, no, I think on whole they have nowhere to go but up, because it's currently not sustainable from a publisher perspective. But I think the view for those who don't have a viewability problem, like our group, we're sort of, when you look at the industry on whole, the scale of non-viewable, if it's half, which is, if that's the real number, then yeah, that's a real issue, and I get that. But it's up to the technology companies really to manage the delivery and the success of that delivery too, to make sure that those things are addressed, in my opinion, especially with the fees that are being charged in the programmatic industry. And I think that is what is, if prices can start to float up, which I agree with, that they only can go up, then it will become a larger part of the mix, and we would make more inventory, more premium inventory available. And that's really where I think the biggest opportunity comes into play for agencies, brands alike, which is if we can make that programmatic or the premium programmatic inventory available in those spaces and make it that as efficient, then that's really interesting.
So in your case, how do you value the engagement piece of it? So I guess for both of you, how do you value the engagement piece in terms of, it's really efficient, and like you just mentioned, I think efficiency is oftentimes tied to cost, which isn't the only type of efficiency, but how do you go to an advertiser or to an agency who's coming to you and saying, we want the lowest CPMs, you have great, sports audience. How do you speak to them in terms of, we're driving a lot more value than just the fact that you can target these people?
Well, we can't unless we're talking direct, really. Our programmatic partners work now do a great job of doing supply side pitch decks and talking about the unique attributes of our inventory. But because the methodology that currently exists, it's about how do I get large blocks of scale and I can price them accordingly so that it works in with my overall plan. And again, I feel that the majority of the advertising and effort in those marketplaces are about scale, and then they'll still do their RFPs for individual campaign elements or integrations and stuff like that. I think how we change that is having a better profile in the system, using the data in the system. And I'm thinking about a system I use, and I find it very useful. Actually, the other benefit we get out of programmatic is it's a lead generation tool for us on the publisher side, and just seeing who's bidding on our inventory, what are they bidding, what does the marketplace want, and it just exposes the brands, and I think that's great. But if we can bridge the gap and create, unlock that premium inventory in the spaces and get the adequate pricing for it, I think the efficiency is going to be amazing.
And just to add to that, the industry needs to get smart about attribution as well. Like, we're actually applying the value that this publisher serves to a given marketer versus a different publisher, or different data points and what they supply to the ultimate either conversion or click or email address, or whatever it is you're looking for on a KPI. I think we're a long way away from having the attribution piece down to this as well.
Yeah, so I couldn't agree more that it really shouldn't be, efficiency shouldn't be about cheap. It really shouldn't, and I think that there's a lot of things that played a part in that, right? So if you've got, you don't know what sites you're running on, so transparency, control, and efficiency are the three things I think about when I think of programmatic. So if you don't, if you're not seeing where your sites are running, well, that's all changing. Now you have viewability. Now we have different metrics to evaluate a creative. At the end of the day, I think, look, every marketer is trying to achieve an objective to drive revenue in some way, shape, or form, whether you're trying to drive it through CPG, through one of your stores that you work with, through your website, whatever that case is, whether you're trying to sell a car, which is that, if it's a $20 CPM and it's a $5 CPM, it goes back to attribution. How do you track that consumer across the channel? And that, to me, is what programmatic brings. It links that CRM of that consumer from the digital side all the way to the store and back again, and then understands that data. And if that costs you $500, you want to understand that cost across everything. Programmatic in a stack actually brings that so you can see that holistically across everything. What you pay for that CPM shouldn't matter. It should be about whether those dots paid out for you, and then understanding how you connected that dots and linking that back to creative and everything else you're doing.
That and to your point, that would help fix any issue in the industry, in my opinion. There's attribution plus the life cycle of the customer. Then it doesn't really matter what the cost is or what's effective, and then you buy media that's effective.
And I agree with that. To us, it's all about price. I mean, we do a lot of analysis. We build algorithms specifically around price, and not to get a low price ultimately. We're not doing that. We're looking to decide what's the right price to pay for a given user as it relates to the outcome you're trying to drive. And to us, all users, for the most part, as long as they're real, are worth something. Whether it's a 10-cent CPM or a $10 CPM, all users are worth something in that value chain. And it's up to us, in my opinion right now, using the data we have and the algorithms we have, to decide what that value is for that impression, what that user attached to it at that given point in time. And this is sort of like real estate, and you've got a piece of property or a piece of land. What's the house look like on that land between the combination of the user and the actual real estate where that user is? And you got to derive a value for that, okay, in real time that equates to, again, the outcomes you're trying to drive.
So I guess to that point, Paul, you work with a lot of agencies, and in my experience, brands are kind of, at least direct response brands, are beating up on their agencies to get the most economical rates. So I'm sure even if you have that particular perspective, agencies are coming to you and saying, you know, give me that $1 or $2 CPM.
We don't ever see the direct response guys come to us and want low rates. Okay, it's the CPG companies that come to us and want low rates because they're used to that when they go buying with their big wallets. Our DR advertisers want very good outcomes regardless of the rate. Okay, so the CPMs that we charge are often much higher on DR-oriented campaigns because often it's a retargeting program and you're willing to pay $10 for that, okay, or whatever the rate is. And the CPG players coming to us, particularly in video, want really low rates, okay, as long as it's sort of like the audience they're trying to reach, because they don't have any other good effective way to measure this because they haven't gotten smarter yet in terms of what they're looking for in the back end. The DR guys are pretty smart of what an impression or a user is worth to them given to the conversion metrics that they're seeking.
That's so interesting because in our world, it's the core buyer of our inventory is really the tier one brands, car companies, CPG companies, and DR advertisers really wouldn't play in our space as much because our customer is 18-35 male. It's a coveted demographic, except it's counterintuitive what's happening where, again, on my other side, we had, major media clients, P&G in the past and stuff, and that was the modus operandi. And it's getting worse, apparently, for being out of it now, where, more scale, cheaper, and, viewability has become, I'm sure it's always been a problem, but it's a more talked about problem now because they're trying to get all of it, and for the most part, all that additional scale is just from additional placements put in the same place, and a lot of it's below the fold or unviewable. It's just common sense stuff. Fraud's one part of it, but I don't think it's the only part of it. And I'm just focused on premium inventory and the benefit of premium inventory, even to the best brand advertisers, and the value of that, and having a relationship with the customer in these digital spaces for long periods of time, especially in mobile. That's going to cost, that's not something that's just known as cheap because you can buy it at scale.
It's ironic how some of the best brands want to pay the cheapest rates for inventory.
I think I heard a common theme from most of you when I was having phone conversations around something to the effect of it doesn't matter how smart the technology gets, you're going to need a brain behind this to kind of know the right strategy to approach. So, kind of taking it back to the very beginning of the conversation, is that the role of the agency at this point? Are they, in my mind, and I was looking at Varric before talking to you. I assumed you were an agency because there's so many agencies that look like what you do now that they're trying to offer that same specific service that it becomes very confusing as to who's doing what. So do you believe specifically that agencies are kind of overstepping, or not necessarily overstepping, those are too strong words, but are going in the wrong direction in terms of what their value proposition is? And I'd like your perspective on that too.
Well, we're technically not an ad agency yet because
Right.
we don't sign any paperwork saying we're an agent of the client per se. So we play more of roles like a publisher or Google will in terms of as a seller of media often. And we try to do selling them intelligent media through the capabilities that we have. I don't think at all agencies are overstepping their bounds. I think agencies have owned the customer relationship for decades, right? So they've got real estate to protect in that. Mm-hmm. And it's a very challenging environment out there because, again, a lot of these agencies, the older school ones, the bigger ones, the holding company ones, are very big legacy systems. It's hard for them to adapt and accommodate with how rapidly fast our space is moving, how rapidly fast the technology and the people's viewpoints on this space are. So, I think that they're not overstepping by any stretch. I think that they are protecting a lot of the real estate that they have. The core part of your question is, I guess, goes back to what you were asking earlier in terms of the role that we're going to play versus an agency moving forward. Look, we're to the point that he made very much systems integrators, okay? And if we're going to end up doing that with an agency, we're happy to do that. And if we want to do that directly with a brand, we're happy to do that as well. We're not big enough to make a decision for a brand how they're going to approach that. Most brands will decide on their own how actively engaged they want to be in the execution, whether they need the help of an agency to help get them through that. Like some people shopping for real estate will need an agent as opposed to going without one. Other brands will become more sophisticated, more eager, and not want to use an agency. We work with a couple of CPG brands that just don't want to use agencies at all, so they work with us. We operate very much like an agency in that environment for them because we place all of their media with us, fortunately. And So again, the space is just very indicative of many different types of approaches today. And I'm not smart enough to know which one's going to last or what's going to be the case in 3 years from now. I could barely figure out 3 weeks from today.
From my perspective, as an agency, I think that there's this whole spectrum of agencies and capabilities within them, and he's right that some of the very large ones are having a tough time adjusting to some of these new ways of working. I think the power of having an agency relationship lies in the same place it was for many, many years, and that is as ambassadors of their clients' brands. And that can really only happen if an agency has a good, long-lasting relationship with their client and understands what the client's brand is all about. As brands get more sophisticated, we were talking earlier, some brands don't even know that their digital ads may not even be viewable. And other brands are very savvy, and the ones that are savvy act more like the DR guys they were talking about, where they know what the value of a customer is along the chain, and they understand they'll pay a little more because they understand that customer is worth more along a certain part of the funnel, right? But there's two opportunities for agencies, especially if they're a little bit smaller. One is to help the less savvy brands understand what a customer is worth to them, what an impression is worth to them, what, where along the funnel it's worth more to spend more, number one. And then number two, really the big opportunity is tying in that brand story, tying in what you as an agency are meant to do, which is to be the champion of the brand and to effectively tell that story. Tie that creative part of it into understanding which channels to use, when to use, retargeting versus, display, social, whatever. I think those are opportunities for agencies of being kind of that counselor and helping the brands that are less savvy help understand all of this data, because a lot of it is, frankly, a lot of it is gibberish to them, and a lot of CMOs are older and they may or may not even understand the implications of viewability and et cetera. So
yeah, I was at a conference about a month ago, and there was a quote up there by Kraft earlier. The CMO Kraft was on the stage, and she said, I don't have a tech problem, I got a marketing problem, guys. And so can you help me figure out my marketing problem? And I think that at the end of the day, technology companies tend to focus too much on the challenges that we're trying to solve in technology. At the end of the day, I think that is rooted in solving marketing problems. But I think the agency can really be that, you said this ambassador, right? Be the ambassador of the problem that the brand and the marketer has, and then how do I want to solve that problem? There's different extremes to that. So one is you become the experts and you figure out how to do that on behalf of the client. The other is that you outsource that and you hire, work with a partner who is an expert in that. But I've seen the other extreme happen where at a prior company we were selling in a solution. It was a programmatic solution. It was a very big client. And the client said, I don't want my agency to manage this at all. They have no idea how this stuff works and they're not willing to learn. So I want you guys to run it and do it. And it was a very awkward position. As a technology vendor, we didn't really want to be in that position, but we also wanted to make sure we won the business. And so I think that the important thing is and I don't know all the dynamics there, but there are lots of interesting ways to partner. It's challenging, and as Paul just said earlier, it changes. It changes every 3 months, if not more often. So I think there's a lot of opportunities to, one, educate your teams, figure out what the marketing problem is. If they're thinking about programmatic, figure out how you can get educated and figure out how you can partner. There's a number of different consulting firms too, or just say, hey, I'm okay even just partnering with that technology vendor. They can be a partner of mine. So there's a lot of ways to work it, and I think that each agency and each client has to figure that out together.
I think the one aspect is kind of going back in time a little bit on the agency side, where the agency really plays a big role right now, one of the major components is the communication plan overall, right? So, on all media, what's the communications plan for that brand? And then I think until the days where the client doesn't need the agency to be accountable and doesn't have that throat to choke, I still think the agency's there. That provides, you know, a third party validation for the efforts and spend against what is happening. And right now, if it was just a technology vendor, you know, it's going to sort of feel like the client's going to the IT department in some regard, because they won't take ownership of it from what I've seen to the level it needs to be owned. You know, even if you take a great technology and a great vendor, the client still needs to have an individual or a group of bodies and analysts dedicated to understanding the channels, optimizing them to meet their effectiveness. And most brand advertisers, they have other jobs, you know, so.
Yeah, can I just add something to that? There's this funny, I think it's kind of funny thing that's happening out there too. A lot of clients like, oh, I want self-service, I want to bring it in-house. And the reality is, especially in the digital side of that business, they might only have 2 or 3 people in their digital group. It could be a billion-dollar company, and they spend hundreds of millions in marketing, but they might only have 2 or 3 people in their digital group. The amount of expertise that has to be hired to bring that in-house, sometimes I think that's where, you know, an agency is very needed. Who's going to do your creative? Who's going to do your strategy? And then even just from the implementation standpoint, implementing and running these campaigns, look, there's a lot of knowledge that goes into pulling a lever. I mean, just a simple retargeting campaign in one of these systems isn't as easy as just pulling a button, as much as people say. And you work in a number of these different types of platforms, and everyone will come in and sell you and say, hey, set it and forget it. It's never set it and forget it.
You know, as automated as this may seem it's supposed to be, it's the most unautomated thing out there. I mean, it's becoming more automated, and we're building automation into what we do, but it's a highly manual human effort to get these campaigns live, to optimize them, to watch them. There's always a fire, there's always something broke over here or over there that needs human interaction to get these issues resolved.
Yeah.
And it takes a lot of effort to get these campaigns up and going.
Yeah, looking at the data and understanding why something's not working. You know, is it the channel or is it the message? Are we retargeting the wrong people? So all these things do take human brains, and you're right. Automation is not necessarily automated. It does make things easier, but you just can't outsource that to an algorithm.
And that's why when people ask me what programmatic is, I still always just bring it back to the data. I mean, it really is about this interconnectivity of data and being smarter about making decisions. And being able to connect that data across the different pieces of the organization, and then I said being smarter, but making those, not just being smarter, but making those decisions in real time. And I think that's really what programmatic's all about. And I mentioned to you on the phone, I said in creating all this efficiency, there's been a lot of inefficiency created. And again, I think there's a number of different folks that can sort that out. I mean, think about we like to say in market, hey, Conversant can be one solution for all your needs, but there's a lot of different point solutions. And so are you going to, if somebody wants to go with different point solutions, who figures that out? So that's just another point there.
I think we have a few minutes for questions.
How's it going, guys? Thank you. I'm Adam Lobelson from Grapeshot. Had a couple questions. So I guess first, we've noticed a trend of some of the major holding group trading desks that they're, I don't want to say dissolving, but the agencies are starting to bring that budget in-house, and they're building out trading capabilities in-house. So are you guys starting to figure out ways or develop strategies to help those desks make that transition? Is that something that you feel like you'd be able to do?
We're certainly in a position to be able to help them. If that becomes part of our strategy, that's. I mean, we're there to help them. We have that occurring within our own sort of small holding company system today. It's my view that some of the tech relative to data is such a core part to the execution that it's tough to separate that yet. Okay, and if you do try to replicate DMPs across agency level, it becomes highly redundant and cost prohibitive for most agencies who don't work with a high margin to begin with. So you've got to work through those elements. And I'm not I understand the Publicis announcement with Viviki last week in terms of how they're decentralizing that approach. We'll see how well that does. I mean, to me, that just means that Viviki didn't get it right on the approach they tried to begin with, so they're looking for something else in there. And the approach that we've used at Varick has worked well for us, okay, and for our clients that we work with and even the agencies that we work with. We do see that over time that we're going to have to develop new either systems or products to help them work and do their jobs better. So we're beginning to look at building more algorithms now. We're actually building our own bidder now. We're building HTML5 creative capabilities. That's all proprietary to us to help campaigns execute better. And we believe that that's going to roll out to them as well. And I can't change the strategy if a holding company or an agency wants to take this on more themselves. That's fine. God bless them. We've already done it. We know how to do it very well. And it's our point of view that let us help you with this to solve your clients' problems as first and foremost. So I think that was the news of last week. We'll see what the news is next week in terms of if that's going to happen again.
Thanks, appreciate that. Just one more part to the question, totally unrelated, but in terms of data, is there, and I know that you guys are using data both first party and third party, but is there now a focus, sort of in either direction, whether first party is more important or third party data is more important, or sort of a hybrid model, mixed model of both, or?
Well, we don't really use third party data, so meaning that we don't purchase third-party data on an exchange and use it for targeting campaigns. We find most of it to be, it's getting better. The third-party data for purchase is getting better. We find the strongest data by far is the first-party client-level data, whether it's CRM data, retargeting data. That is the most valuable data. And the degree to which clients want to activate against that is our primary first sort of choice. We also use a lot of the data that's our first-party data. I don't know if it's first, second, third, fourth party, whatever it is, but all the data that we get off of our log level data on the ads that we serve against people, we use that data often and a lot. So we build warehouses of users and we watch what they do relative to the optimizations that we do as well outside of having to buy that data. We tend to like free data, so it's data that we get in the log levels. We don't have to pay for that. We don't have to pay for first-party data we get from the U.S. Census or even NOAA, weather data from NOAA. We like data that we don't have to pay for per se if we're doing a DR campaign.
Yeah, we take the same view. Conversing across all the different companies we work with, we did a simple analysis and we saw something like 400. We work with a lot of retailers, and then we have a big affiliate network called CJ, which is part of our business. We saw something like 400 transactions per second in Q4. I'm sorry, about 700 or 800 transactions per second. Amazon saw something like 400 transactions per second. All of that data is then brought in to create first-party segments that we use to target against. So it's very unique proprietary data. The other trend that we see, especially as being part of the Epsilon entity, is people wanting to target their first-party data. That's been happening over time. And then understanding that better. So whether you're connecting it online to offline, we do all of our own matching in-house. Other folks will use other vendors to do matching so that you're then targeting that data in-house. And yeah, certainly if a client wants to target leveraging third-party data, we will certainly enable that for them, but it's not something we typically do.
Nuno, panel, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
We're going to take a coffee break, but when we come back, we're going to revisit the question of creative, but stressing instead the ways in which data can inform creative and whether creative really can catch up to the kind of precision that targeting seems to have mastered, and whether we're really going to be able to match messages against the segmentation that we've been able to create. We're going to finish out the day by talking about the rise of the private exchange and its impact on the entire ecosystem. So grab some coffee. We'll be back in about 10 minutes.
It's been a long time since I've seen your smiling face. It's been a long time since I've seen a sunny day. It's been a long time since you wore your pillbox hat. It's been a long time since we drove your Pontiac. It's been a